Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this morning's Beef Brunch Educational Webinar. My name is Ashley Edwards, and I'm an Assistant Extension Agent and Coordinator of Animal Science Programs for the LSU Ag Center. I will be hosting today with the help of Jason Holmes, Livestock Specialist in the Northeast region. Our speaker today is Dr. Ed Twidwell. He is a professor in the LSU School of Plant, Environmental, and Soil Sciences, and he will be discussing winter forage options for livestock producers. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please make sure your microphones remain muted throughout the webinar. If you're joining us via the Teams app or link, you can enter your questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. If you are calling in and have questions, you can text your questions to me. My number is 512-818-5476. In the interest of time, we're going to wait until the end to answer any of the questions, but again, you can submit them at any point in time into the Q&A box. With that, Dr. Twidwell, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning, and you should be able to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, thanks, Ashley. Pleasure for me to be here this morning. I know with it being middle of July and 95 degrees, it's kind of hard to be thinking about winter pastures, but still it's something to at least start thinking about and start getting things lined up a little bit about your winter pasture. And to start off with, we might ask the question, why do we need to plant winter pastures? And there are some definite advantages of planting winter pastures. It's going to provide you with some excellent quality grazing during the winter and spring months. It reduces your dependence on stored forages, and it may be the most economical way of wintering your cow herd. You know, the cows have to be fed in some form or fashion. So planting some winter pasture may be your most economical means of getting the cattle through the winter. Now, there are a few disadvantages. Some of these would be the cost of seed, fuel, and fertilizer. It does take some time and labor. You may or may not have the proper planting equipment to do a good job of establishing a stand of winter annuals. And even if you do things correctly, there's no guarantee of planting success. Mother Nature has a way of kind of fouling things up from time to time. So you can go through all the time and expense of planting and still you may not end up with the stand that you need. So there are some risk involved. Your other option is to try to winter your cow herd by just feeding hay and using some protein and energy supplements. So I encourage producers to get out their calculator and calculate out which method they think may be the most economical for them. But today I'm not really going to focus on the hay and supplementation. That's more on the nutritional end. I'm going to focus on moving forward with actually planting winter pastures. And one of the first things we can look at is what plant species can be used for winter pasture. And I've got it highlighted. Annual ryegrass is by far the most common species we use for annual pasture. There are some other ones here that we'll go through this morning: oats, wheat, rye, clovers, brassicas, and then winter peas or vetch. But annual ryegrass, as I mentioned, is by far the most popular winter forage crop. So we'll focus most of our attention on annual ryegrass. Just some facts and figures about annual ryegrass. It's grown on about 300,000 acres in Louisiana. And one reason it's so popular is it's probably the easiest winter forage we have to plant. We'll kind of go through some different methods here in a little bit, but most producers have pretty good success in establishing annual ryegrass. Now, it is a cross-pollinating species, so there's a large amount of genetic variability present In other words, you may have some plants a little bit taller than others, some maybe a little shorter, etc. So there, in a given field of ryegrass, there is a decent amount of variability. Now, back in the 30s up through the 50s, ryegrass was primarily grown along the Gulf Coast, not so much in the northern part of the state. And one of the big issues along the coast was rust. Rust disease was a major issue. And it wasn't until 1958 when Texas A&M came out with Gulf ryegrass, which we still grow a lot of today. But it was really the first variety that had any type of rust resistance. So it was really a pretty big breakthrough. So Gulf was very important for quite a few years. And then Marshall ryegrass came out in 1981. And you can see by the map here where it was found. And it really moved the popularity of ryegrass further north. You can see this up in northern Mississippi. So once we came out with Marshall ryegrass, it was pretty winter hardy. It really moved acreage further north. And then just a few other more notable varieties. Some of these have been around quite a while, like Jackson. Has good cold tolerance and good rust resistance. Prine is still pretty popular, and Nelson came out about 10 years ago, and it's still a pretty popular variety. Now, there are some genetic differences among varieties, ryegrass varieties. Most ryegrass have 14 chromosomes and are classified or is known as diploid varieties. There is a chemical procedure, though, where you can go in and double the number of chromosomes. And by doubling the number of chromosomes, you can produce varieties that are called tetraploid varieties. And some of those you can see listed there are varieties that have been pretty popular over the last 10 years or so, like Prine and Nelson. Now, some of the tetraploid characteristics that make them a little bit different than the diploid varieties like Gulf and Marshall and Jackson are, since they have double the number of chromosomes, it makes for larger plants. The plants have larger leaves. The seed is actually even larger, and they typically are a little bit later in maturity. The big question mark is, though, are they higher in yield or higher in quality? I know this is used as kind of a marketing ploy sometimes, but are they higher? Are they always going to be higher in yield and quality? Probably not. And we'll discuss this a little bit more. But they are definitely different than the traditional diploid varieties. Almost all of our ryegrass seed comes from Oregon. There's a valley in Oregon called the Willamette Valley. It's where most of the ryegrass seed is produced. And I was talking to a contact person I have out there just yesterday, and they're just now starting to harvest ryegrass seed for this year. They're behind a little bit. Typically, they start harvesting around the 4th of July. So they're about a week or so behind. And as far as the crop goes, they had very good growing conditions this winter and spring. So they expect to have a pretty decent ryegrass seed crop this year. So I'm guessing that seed prices are going to be fairly similar to what they were last year. Now, one of the issues with seed production is ryegrass is not only grown just for forage, it's also grown for turf, erosion control, and there's been a lot of interest in cover crops here the last 5 years or so. So that's really increased the demand for ryegrass seed. So what you pay for ryegrass seed is very much a supply and demand type of thing. So when there's a small supply, expect the price to go up. But I think it's going to be pretty similar to what it was last year. Now in Louisiana, we do have a Ag Center variety testing program where we test about 10 to 25 varieties each year. These are planted in small plots, and they use a harvester similar to what we have in the picture here to harvest these plots with. And they can be harvested anywhere from 5 to 6 times a year. And we plant these at 3 different locations: Winsboro in the northern part of the state, Franklinton in the southeast part of the state, and Jeanerette in the south central part of the state. Now, in order for a variety to be on our suggested planting list, we have to test it for at least 3 years, and it has to perform satisfactorily over those 3 years. Now, this is the list of suggested varieties for 2020 and 21. And we just put this list together, and I sent it out to the extension agents here last week. So if any producers out there that want this list, and I'll show you some data here in just a second. But if you're interested in getting this information, just contact your local extension agent, and they should be able to provide that to you. You can see there's a pretty long list of varieties on there. Some of these may or may not be available from your local seed source. So if there's a variety on there you think you may want to try, now's a good time to check with your local seed source and see if they have that variety available. Now, one thing I will point out is that Gulf and Jackson have not performed very well over the past 3 years, and they are not on our suggested list for this year. And if you look at the data, again, this is a 3-year average in terms of pounds per acre. You can see Wax Marshall was on top, and I didn't have room to put all the varieties on there, but this is about the top 10 varieties. And you can see there's not a real wide margin in yields. I mean, the mean was 7,758 pounds per acre, and the top yielding variety was 8,300 pounds, so about 600 pounds above the mean. So not a real widespread difference there. And Gulf ranked 23 out of 24, and Jackson was 24 out of 24, and they did not make the cut to be on our list of suggested varieties. But again, if you want to get this data, contact your local extension agent. Now, I put this slide in here. Dr. Allison at Winsboro took this data in 2014, dealing with freeze damage, especially when we get up in the northern part of the state. We're always more concerned about winter injury than maybe we are in the southern part of the state. So they had some temperatures in the mid-teens in late January of that year, and then he went out in mid-March and rated all the different varieties. And you can see the average was a rating of 2, and Gulf had double that, which indicated it had about twice as much winter injury as most of these other varieties. You can see some of these varieties that we think as being pretty winter hardy, like Marshall and Jackson, they have ratings below 2. So winter injury is something that you do need to take into account. Especially the further north you're trying to produce your ryegrass. Now, most of the newer ryegrass varieties, they are going to cost more than Gulf. As I mentioned previously, Gulf is probably the most popular variety, mainly because it's the cheapest variety. But these newer varieties are going to cost more. There's no doubt about it. Are they worth the extra money? Well, compared to Gulf, most of these newer varieties do offer some insurance against cold damage. They do have some winter hardiness in them, and especially if you're in a stocker cattle business and your livelihood depends on putting weight gains on these cattle during the winter and spring, you've got to have some high quality grazing. So you're probably more likely to look at planting a variety that has some winter hardiness to it. Now, some producers will want to mix Gulf with a winter hardy variety like Marshall, and that's fine. That will give you maybe at least some insurance that you'll have to have some ryegrass there, even if temperatures do get relatively cold. Another consideration is difference in maturity, and there are a fair amount of differences in maturity among these different ryegrass varieties. And Gulf is one of the earliest varieties to mature, and a lot of people like that aspect of Gulf because it grows during the winter and the early spring, and then it pretty well matures and fades on out, which allows your summer grasses to come on earlier. Your Bermudas and Bahias can come on a little bit faster. The newer varieties, most of them are going to mature later than Gulf, and that can be viewed as a pro or a con. It is going to depress the growth on your summer grasses, but it's going to allow you to graze the ryegrass a little bit longer into say May or maybe even early June, or it'll allow you to come in and make a cutting of ryegrass hay if that's what you want to do. So it really boils down to what do you prefer. There's really no right or wrong answer there. It's just whatever works best in your particular situation. But Gulf is definitely one of the earliest varieties to mature. Now we get asked this question a lot: are there differences in forage quality among these different varieties? And this is some kind of old data, but I think it kind of tells what I would show you if I showed some more recent data. And there's a little bit of variability among these varieties, but not anything that really stands out really significant. And the other thing is, when you go compare these different varieties, I just got through mentioning that there are differences in maturity. So say you're comparing Gulf, that's going to mature earlier than something like say a Marshall. Is that really a true variety difference, or is it just a maturity difference? You'd have to harvest them at the exact same maturity stage in order to get an accurate assessment of that, and that's very difficult to do. So it's always been kind of my feeling that that maturity has more of an influence on forage quality than variety does. So when you're using ryegrass, try to keep it in the highest quality state possible. But maturity has more of an effect than anything else on quality. Now, the University of Arkansas did some work over a 10-year period where they went out and clipped some pastures of producers, and then they pooled all this information together. And this, to me, just really shows how high quality ryegrass pasture can provide. I mean, when you've got crude protein in the 20s and digestibilities in the mid 70s, it's hard to beat. I mean, if you're going to try to winter your cow herd with hay and supplements, you're going to have some pretty high quality level of supplementation there to compete with what ryegrass can give you. And again, I think that's why annual ryegrass is such a popular species to use. But there are some other things we can look at. Small grains, what about using them for winter pastures? There's some amount of interest in this, but again, I go back to the fact that most producers have a pretty good chance of success with annual ryegrass, and that again is why it's most popular. Now, when you look at the small grains, and this would be oats, wheat, and cereal rye, and if you look at this table here, one thing that really jumps out at you is the number of seeds per pound. Ryegrass has 224,000 seeds per pound, and these other ones average probably about 15,000 seeds per pound. So the seed of these small grains is much, much larger. And consequently, they're going to have to be planted deeper. You can't just plant oats and wheat the same way you plant ryegrass, just kind of throwing it on top of the ground and maybe harrowing it in a little bit. This is not going to work very well. They really need to be planted at a depth of about 1 to 2 inches. And probably the best way to plant these small grains is with a drill. And there's not a lot of producers that may have drills available. So from that standpoint, that is why annual ryegrass is much more popular, just easier to plant. You don't necessarily have to have a drill to do it. Now, having said that, there are some very good oat varieties available. The oats can provide some pretty high quality forage, can provide early grazing. The disadvantage of oats are they're not very winter hardy. So who around the state plants oats? Well, it's pretty popular among the dairy producers. They'll go in and plant oats in early September to try to give them some early grazing. Because with dairy producers, you all know they have to have high quality forage during the entire year. So they plant oats early to try to have some forage there that they can get some pretty good grazing with. The other people that plant oats are deer hunters that use the oats for wildlife food plots. And there are some beef cattle people that plant oats, but it's just not real popular. There are some very good oat varieties available. This LA 99016 is available, and it's very popular among the deer hunters for food plots. And also anybody who's interested in having some good quality forage early in the fall. Now, wheat, the Ag Center does not test varieties for forage production. Most of the wheat varieties are very winter hardy. We really don't have any varieties we can recommend for forage. I would say just go with a variety that does well in your area for grain production. That's about the best we can come up with for wheat. Now, cereal rye, especially in the northern part of the state, I know there are some producers that like cereal rye. It's very winter hardy. There are several varieties available. And the rye does mature earlier than ryegrass. So again, if you want to get these winter pasture off your field and let the summer grasses come on, cereal rye is not a bad option. Probably the biggest advantage it has is it's very, very winter hardy. Now, this is some data from a study that was done quite a few years ago at Rose Pine. This compares ryegrass to these small grains. And you can see the big advantage ryegrass has is if you look at May. You know, it's really the only winter forage we have that's going to give you a lot of production in May. And the small grains will do okay early, you say November, December, January. But when we start getting into the spring, they're pretty well going to start fading away by sometime in April. But with ryegrass, you're going to get that extra grazing into to at least mid-May, maybe late May. So again, I think that's why ryegrass is probably more popular than the small grain. Getting into a little bit more of the agronomics here on planting methods and that type of thing. When should your winter pasture be planted? Well, it depends upon if you're going to plant a prepared seed bed or if you're going to overseed your summer sod. For prepared seed bed, we shoot for about September 20th, and for overseed about mid-October. And really, which method you go with depends upon when you want to be able to start grazing these crops. If you, say, you're running a stocker cattle operation and you need grazing, say, by Thanksgiving or Christmas, you're absolutely going to have to plant your ryegrass on a prepared seed bed. You're just not going to get much grazing, early grazing, unless you do that. On the other hand, if you don't need early grazing, you're fine with waiting until January or February to get some amount of grazing. Then overseeding is probably gonna work better for you. So again, the prepared seed bed, big advantage it has, gives you early grazing. Disadvantage is you don't have the sod there to hold the livestock up very well. So, you know, if we get in a wet winter and spring, you're not going to be able to have the animals out there. Maybe you may not be able to graze as much as you want because the pasture may get too muddy. So there's some pros and cons with the prepared seed bed. Overseeded, again, you're not going to get much grazing until after the first of the year. The advantage, though, is you've got the sod, your summer sod still there plus the ryegrass, so you're not going to have a lot of bogging. So again, it just depends upon which one's going to fit into your operation better. Now, if you want to go the prepared seed bed route, you probably don't want to. You are going to have to do some tillage, so you probably don't want to do that too far in advance. I normally don't recommend planting until at least September 20th. And the reason for that is if you go much earlier than that, it's still pretty hot and dry. We can have armyworm issues with armyworm moving into the seedling ryegrass. And there is a ryegrass disease called blast disease that can affect early planted ryegrass. So normally I like to suggest waiting until at least September 20th. It'll start to cool off a little bit before you plant the ryegrass in a prepared seed bed. Overseeded, again, we're shooting for about mid-October here. And what we normally recommend is where you're going to be overseeding the ryegrass, go in that pasture and clip it down or graze it down as short as possible. Come in about mid-October and do the planting. You don't really want to plant too much earlier on that because you're still going to get some competition from the summer grasses. And then once you broadcast the seed, you can pull a coulter packer or a drag or something over it just to kind of work the seed in the ground a little bit. As far as the optimum seed rate for ryegrass, I know we've done surveys where we ask producers different questions, and the seeding rates, I remember getting a result back. I got numbers anywhere from 10 pounds up to 100 pounds per acre is what they typically plant. So there's a pretty wide range of seeding rates that producers use. Most of our research indicates that a seeding rate of about 35 pounds per acre is adequate in most cases. Now, if you're planting on a prepared seed bed, you might go a little bit higher than that, just from the standpoint that you know you're not going to have a lot there to keep the animals from bogging down. So maybe go a little higher rate. Some people feel that might give you a little bit of protection to help the animals from bogging too much. But other than that, we really don't see much advantage to going much higher than say 35 pounds per acre. What is the best seeding method? You can either broadcast a seed or use a drill. And there are some pros and cons of this. A broadcast is cheaper, it's easier to use. The disadvantage is you may not get real even seed placement. On the flip side, though, with a drill, there's not that many drills available. Most producers don't want to spend the money to actually buy a drill. So you may have to go together to buy a drill with some of your neighbors, or I know some of the conservation districts have drills that you can rent. Now, one advantage that drills have, though, is if you want to plant, say, ryegrass and a clover, they typically have 2 seed boxes on them, so allows you to do that very, very well. And also, you can probably reduce your seeding rate a little bit by using a drill, because it's going to put the seed down in a very good uniform depth. So you might be able to reduce your seeding rate a little bit. But bottom line, if you look at the research studies, they really don't show a whole lot of difference in production between those 2 methods. It kind of boils down to whichever one you have the equipment for, whichever one you feel the most comfortable with. Now, to me, this is an important piece of equipment to own for a forage producer. Nothing real fancy here, just something like an old cultipacker or roller. Again, once you plant the ryegrass, you can run over that just to firm up the seed bed, make sure the seed gets pressing into the soil a little bit. You don't necessarily have to have a cultipacker. Anything will work, like a little harrow, or put together a piece of fence, or whatever. Just anything you can use to help get that seed worked down into the soil a little bit after it's seeded. I'm just not a big fan of broadcasting the seed on the top of the ground and leaving it, because some of that seed is going to get hung up on the leaves of the grass, and I just don't think you're going to get optimum stands. Now, I do have some producers that will, especially if they're seeding a small acreage, will broadcast the seed and then let the cows kind of tromp the seed into the ground. That's starting to become a little more popular. But I'm not sure I do that on a real large acreage. But if you just have a small area you want to plant, that might work. But you've got to get the seed in the ground some way or another. I'm just not a big fan of just broadcasting and leaving it on top of the ground. Now, obviously, another common way of planting is to call the local co-op and have them mix the seed and fertilizer and come out with a cart and seed it for you. And that's fine for them to broadcast it like that. But again, I'd pull a packer or harrow or something over that when they're done broadcasting it, just to make sure the seed gets planted uniformly. And I don't have a lot of time this morning to go into different fertilizer rates and that type of thing, but by all means, use some soil tests to help you determine what types of fertilizer rates, or maybe if you need to apply some lime this fall. Now's a good time to be doing that. We're sitting here middle of July. Not a bad time to go out and take some soil tests. And if you do need to put some lime out prior to planting your ryegrass, it'll at least give you an idea of how much lime you need to put out, or if you need to put out some phosphorus or potash or what have you. Now's a good time to take some soil tests. As far as just comparing prepared versus overseeding, obviously in a prepared seed bed, you're hoping that you're going to have higher production, and the research kind of bears that out. And this was a study done quite a few years ago, but I think it points out that in an overseeded situation, you're just not going to get a lot of production in the early winter. It's going to be after March 1st is when you start getting more production, but it's still not going to give you as much production as planting on a prepared seed bed. And this is from the Hill Farm Station, which is in the northwest part of the state. Again, kind of shows the same thing. That with overseeding, you're just not going to get much growth until later on in the spring. You can see the big jump there going from March into April. So again, it depends upon when you need to forage. You know, if you need to forage early before Christmas, you're going to have to plant on a prepared seed bed. No two ways about it. Now, I'll kind of get off of ryegrass here and delve into a few other things. We have clovers. Why are clovers useful? Well, they can provide excellent quality. They can extend the grazing season into the summer months. Advantage clovers have is they fix their own nitrogen, anywhere from 50 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Now, most of that nitrogen is not available until the plant dies. It may transfer a little bit of nitrogen to the ryegrass, but not a great lot. Now, clovers are definitely not for everybody. One big consideration with clovers is your soil pH must be higher than 5.8, or else I would not really mess with trying to grow clovers. Now, most of the clover seed today is coated. And in that coating, it contains a small amount of lime, inoculants, fungicide, maybe a little bit of fertilizer, etc. There's a lot of different strategies on these different coating products. But clovers are not going to give you much grazing during the fall and winter months. They're going to come on in the spring. Broadleaf weed control options are pretty limited. Say you have buttercup in there, it's going to be hard to take that out. And then bloat is a concern when using these clovers. Now you need to plant the clover same time as the ryegrass in the fall. Again, they don't need to be planted very deep, 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. All these clovers except white clover are considered annual, so you're going to have to plant them every year. And the one thing we've noticed with clovers are they're much more site specific than ryegrass. As I mentioned earlier, most people can get a pretty good stand of ryegrass. Clovers, not so much. They seem to be a lot more finicky than ryegrass does. So bottom line is you may have to experiment with several types of clover to determine which ones are going to work best on your farm. Now, just briefly going over some of the major clovers, we have crimson clover. It works well on well-drained soils. You get up into the, say, north of Alexandria and start getting into more of the rolling hills. Works very well. White clover works a little better on heavy soils. Has a long growing season. I mean, if we're getting decent rainfall, it'll last well into the summer. And we got some very good varieties of white clover available. Ball clover has started to become very popular among hunters because it reseeds very well. And it also works well on well-drained soil. Red clover seems to be pretty site-specific. I know in South Louisiana we've got a variety called Red Ace that seems to be doing pretty well. Now, a colleague of mine, Dr. Allison, is performing some clover variety evaluations on a limited basis at Winsboro in North Louisiana. The issue is a lot of these clover companies, they don't really pay to have these varieties tested, so it's hard to do a real large scale variety trial. But he is doing some evaluation. Just a couple other things. These are pretty minor species. Austrian winter peas can be very high in quality. An issue with them, though, is they do cause some bloat. And I've noticed over the last few years with the emphasis on cover crops, we're starting to see more of these minor species included in mixes like the peas. And the next one I'll mention here is hairy vetch. Hairy vetch has pretty high quality. It's not real palatable, especially when it gets to a little later maturity stage. Now, there's a lot of hairy vetch just commonly grows in pastures on a volunteer basis. So when it's grazed young, you can get some decent grazing out of it. And the last group I'll talk about are brassica species. And these include such things as turnip, rape, and kale. They're very high quality, but they contain a lot of water. And the other thing is these things are not real winter hardy. So if you get some temperatures into the 20s, they're going to be toast. But again, these are what these crops look like. Some of the producers I visited with says it does take the livestock a little bit of time to kind of get it adjusted to grazing these crops because they're not a grass like the most cattle are used to grazing. So it takes a little while to get adjusted to them. They definitely need to be planted in September on a prepared seed bed. We have found that trying to overseed these brassica species just does not work very well. You just don't get very good production with them. So just to kind of summarize, now's the time. We've got the variety trial data put together so you can sit down and use that variety trial information to help you select varieties. Highly suggest you use 3-year average yields rather than just 1-year yields because in a 1-year trial, you don't really know exactly what the environmental conditions are. It's much better to use a 3-year average yield because that tends to minimize environmental effects. And then check with your seed supplier to make sure they have the varieties available that you're interested in using. They may or may not have those available. Again, now's a good time to be taking soil tests while it's hot outside. You can at least put yourself through some good work to get some soil tests done. And again, if you're planning on planting some clovers, make sure your pH is above 5.8. And again, if your pH is below that, go out and take the soil test and get some lime applied because it'll take the lime a little while to get worked into the soil. And with that, that's all I have presentation-wise. If anybody has any questions, they can fire them my way.
All right, thank you, Dr. Twidwell. If you don't mind, stop sharing your screen. I'm going to share mine really quick, and then Jason can let us know. If y'all have any other questions, please get them into the Q&A. Trying to make sure.
So Dr. This is Jason. We did have one question that popped up. If you want to touch on it real quick, the question was, when can we plant oats?
The oats can be, the question was on oats. They can be planted a little bit earlier than ryegrass. I know some of the dairy producers in the southeast part of the state, they'll plant right around Labor Day. So again, they're trying to get some early forage production out of them. So early September would probably be okay. You know, it's kind of taking a risk with the weather and all, with it being hot and dry. But a lot of the dairy producers I know will go ahead and give it a shot because it will go. They will give you some decent production if you do get a little rain on it. But I wouldn't plant them much before Labor Day.
Jason, did we have any other questions?
No, ma'am. That's the only one that's showing up right now.
Are you able to see my PowerPoint with the survey information?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we ask that you please take just a couple of minutes to complete a survey for our Beef Brunch Educational Series. This helps us improve on the webinar series in the future. You can leave any comments there as well. The way to do that is to open the camera on your phone, and you can view the little QR code that I have here on the right. When you do that, a little notification banner should appear on your phone. You can click on that and go directly to the survey. Again, the survey will only take 1 to 2 minutes of your time. I will also post the link, the direct link to the survey, when I post this video on YouTube. So in a couple of days, I will have this posted to our LSU Ag Center Livestock channel on YouTube. It is also going to be on our Beef Brunch webpage. That is lsuagcenter.com/beefbrunch. We are listing those under the past webinars section. We also have some webinars coming up. Our next one will be in August on Tuesday the 11th. So Tuesday, August the 11th, we will have Dr. Guillermo Scaglia talking about grazing nutrition. We already have a flyer posted under future webinars on our Beef Brunch site. And then in September, we will have Dr. Christine Navarre coming on and giving a talk as well. So again, please check out that website for any of that information. We are also doing bi-weekly news updates. And so all those videos get posted to both the YouTube channel, which again is LSU Ag Center-Livestock, or on our Beef Brunch page, lsuagcenter.com/beefbrunch.
Okay, we do have one more question for Dr. Twidwell real quick. Okay. So the question, Dr. Twidwell, is when do we need to put out lime for it to be effective for the ryegrass crop? Again, when do we need to apply lime for it to be effective for the ryegrass crop?
Okay, well, I'd say the sooner the better. I normally think it's going to take about anywhere from 2 to 3 months for that lime to actually be working properly. So I would try to get my soil test taken here as soon as possible and try to get it out by say the 1st of August or so, if at all possible.
Do we have any other questions, Jason?
No, ma'am.
All right, and if y'all have any questions in the future, or if you're watching this on YouTube after the live event has already occurred, please reach out to your local extension agent. If they cannot answer that, then they can get in contact with Dr. Twidwell and make sure we get those questions answered for you. So thank you, Dr. Twidwell, for taking the time to come and talk to us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any questions regarding our Beef Brunch Educational Series, please feel free to reach out and contact me. My email is akedwards@agcenter.lsu.edu. My number is 512-818-5476, and I'll have all that information below the video and YouTube as well. Thank you all again, and have a great day.